She slid the contract across the table and stole my future. Executive boardroom, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, tension thick as stock options before a market crash. And there it was, my $18 million deal displayed on the buy, gleaming mahogany with her signature where mine should have been. Sophia stood there in her perfectly tailored suit, reciting my client acquisition strategy like she'd dreamed it during a weekend at her Hamptons estate. No attribution, no acknowledgment, just her smug smile absorbing congratulations from men in Brooks Brothers suits and Swiss timepieces. But the real gut punch, the client had specifically requested me on page 7 of the requirements document. She forgot to scrub that detail. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I discovered this 15 minutes before the signing ceremony when her assistant asked me to double-check the appendices like I was some office clerk and not the woman who had cultivated the relationship, structured the entire deal, and spent 6 months flying to Tokyo and back. The $18 million contract she was now claiming as her crowning achievement like a trophy won in someone else's marathon. Want to know what it feels like to watch your career-defining moment get appropriated into someone else's highlight reel while you sit silent at the far end of the conference table? It's not anger. Not immediately. It's this hollow, ice-cold realization, a warning bell in your chest saying you're witnessing the theft in real time and you're the victim without a voice. And here's the kicker. They loved her for it. The executive team nodding appreciatively, asking for implementation timelines. The CFO even muttered, "This is exactly the kind of initiative I've been hoping to see from leadership." Sophia gave that practiced humble nod she's perfected since business school and said, "It's all about strategic relationship cultivation at the right levels." I nearly choked because 3 weeks ago, while I was negotiating the final terms over midnight calls with Tokyo, she was complaining in the break room about how Japanese businesses move too slowly and require too much hand-holding. Now she was the corporate hero, and I was the invisible workhorse. But invisible doesn't mean powerless. And I already had something forming in my mind. Not just revenge, something cleaner, more precise, more public. Let's just say I opened my laptop that night, found my original pitch deck and correspondence history, and didn't close it. Digital paper trails don't judge you for seeking justice at 2:34 a.m. They just ask where you want to save the evidence. I named the folder Nakamura Partnership, Original Communications. No embellishment, no dramatization, just the raw, unfiltered record of 18 months of relationship building that Sophia had condensed into a bulleted list of her supposed achievements. I restored every email thread she'd been conveniently excluded from, every meeting minute where her name was notably absent, and every client request that specifically mentioned me by name. The documentation hit different when compiled. It read like an investigative report. This is the work of one woman who refused to let her career-defining deal disappear under someone else's nameplate. This folder contains a timeline, communication, logs and contract developments designed around real client needs, real relationship milestones, and real trust that was built one Tokyo dinner at a time. If this resonates with anyone in leadership who values authenticity over opportunism, I'm willing to discuss next steps. I stared at that final line for 30 minutes before saving the document. It wasn't just a folder. It was a flare shot into the corporate night sky. And I didn't send it to Sophia. I sent it to Marcus Chen, our Global Partnerships Director, with a simple subject line, "For your review, Nakamura Deal Context." Marcus wasn't just any executive. He was the one who'd initially connected me with Nakamura's procurement team, but had been traveling in Europe during the final negotiations. He had skin in this game too, and more importantly, he had Sophia's boss's ear. I didn't ask him to escalate it. I didn't need to. By 7 a.m., my phone looked like a notification center during a system-wide alert. "Just reviewed your documentation. Is this accurate? Calendar invites show you led every meeting? These requirements specifically name you as account lead. Did Sophia explain why she signed instead? The negotiation timeline shows no involvement from her until final stages, setting up a call with Richard. I felt a surge of vindication followed immediately by dread. Richard was our SVP of Global Accounts. Sophia's promotion to director had been his decision. My evidence wasn't just questioning Sophia's integrity, it was challenging his judgment. But then came the email from Nakamura himself. Subject line: regarding yesterday's contract. I didn't open it immediately. I forwarded it to our legal team first with a note: please advise on appropriate response given current internal review. Then I forwarded it to HR with the same documentation I'd sent Marcus. And finally, because strategic thinking requires comprehensive intelligence, I took a screenshot and sent it to Claire in finance, who'd processed all my Tokyo expense reports and knew exactly how many 5 a.m. breakfast meetings I'd hosted. Why? Claire? Because she had access to the expense system that tracked every coffee, every dinner, every client gift authorized under this account. All with my employee ID, not Sophia's. I hadn't given much thought to this evidence trail before. But 15 minutes after sending the folder to Marcus, I realized the paper trail wasn't just compelling, it was irrefutable. Sophia must have caught wind of something by 9:30 a.m. because she was pacing the executive floor, phone pressed to her ear, gestures increasingly agitated. I walked past her corner office holding a coffee I didn't need, just to gauge the atmosphere. She was pleading. No, you don't understand. I was overseeing the whole process. She was just handling the details. Look, can we— A pause. Richard, please. I just need to explain how— Another pause. But the deal is signed. That's what matters, right? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The call ended, and so did whatever illusion of control she thought she maintained. Because this wasn't about who got final credit for a signature. It was about who earned the client's trust first. And sweetheart, my name was embedded in that trust, like a watermark on premium stationery. By 11:15 a.m., I was sitting across from Richard in his corner office that smelled of leather-bound portfolios and expensive cologne. Richard wasn't just an SVP, he was the kingmaker. The one whose endorsement had launched 3 executive careers and ended twice as many. He had the kind of presence that made even the most senior directors straighten their posture, and the kind of institutional memory that never required a refresher on personnel files. And right now, his piercing gaze was fixed squarely on me. So, he said, tapping his Mont Blanc pen against a printed copy of my documentation. You're telling me Sophia essentially claimed your work, signed a deal you cultivated, and is now positioned for the commission and recognition. I didn't nod. I didn't need to emphasize what was already laid bare in 18 months of documented evidence. I simply opened my laptop and pulled up a folder labeled Meeting Recordings. Time-stamped video calls with Nakamura and his team. Presentation recordings where I walked through implementation strategies 6 months ago. Sophia visible only in the corner of one frame, scrolling through her phone during client questions. Richard leaned back, lips pressed into a thin line like he'd just discovered his favorite restaurant had been serving microwaved entrees at premium prices. She presented this deal to the executive committee like she'd cultivated it from inception, he said, voice measured but with an unmistakable edge. Went so far as to suggest her promotion was justified by this very achievement. I remained silent, letting the weight of my evidence speak volumes in the quiet office. Why didn't you come forward sooner? He finally asked. I paused, carefully, selecting my words. Because Everest Financial rewards results, not complaints. I figured the client relationship would speak for itself, and the documentation would eventually tell the truth. He didn't smile, but something shifted in his expression. He tapped twice on the folder, then leaned forward. Nakamura is asking, why you weren't at the signing ceremony. Says he specifically requested your presence and signature alongside legal. Richard's tone had changed. Let me be very clear about something. I don't promote people who build their success on stolen achievements. If what you're showing me checks out, and I have no reason to doubt it will, I want you to walk me through the entire client relationship from the beginning. Your perspective, no filters. I did, for 68 minutes straight. I wasn't pleading my case. I was unpacking 18 months of relationship cultivation like a masterclass in international business development, cultural nuances in Japanese corporate decision-making, risk mitigation strategies for currency fluctuation, concerns, customized implementation timelines that accounted for their fiscal year differences. I even showed him the handwritten notes I'd kept from every meeting, including the one where Nakamura mentioned his daughter's acceptance to Stanford, information I'd used to arrange a campus tour during his San Francisco visit. By the end, Richard sat back and asked the question that would define everything that followed. What do you want from this situation, Alexandria? And I told him, I wanted recognition for the Nakamura deal. I wanted the commission structure that reflected my contribution, not a team allocation where Sophia would receive the lion's share. I wanted a formal client transition where Nakamura would know his account was being handled with the same care moving forward. Most importantly, I wanted Sophia to acknowledge her misrepresentation in the same forum where she'd claimed my achievement, the executive committee meeting scheduled for Friday morning. Richard exhaled slowly, like someone contemplating the cost of necessary structural repairs. I'll address this immediately. There will be a correction, and it won't be subtle. But Alexandria, he paused, studying me with new consideration. This level of relationship building is director-level work. Why are you still in a senior manager role? I held his gaze. Perhaps you should ask whoever has been reviewing my performance evaluations for the past 2 years. Understanding dawned on his face. Sophia had been my direct supervisor since her promotion to director 18 months ago, exactly when my work with Nakamura began. The implications hung in the air between us, unspoken but unmistakable. By 3 p.m., the corporate machinery was in full motion. HR had scheduled meetings with both Sophia and me. Legal had reached out to Nakamura with a carefully worded email about ensuring continuity of your valued partnership. The executive floor was humming with the particular energy that accompanies impending leadership adjustments. That electric quietness where casual conversations stop when elevator doors open. Sophia's glass-walled office was now fully visible, blinds raised as if in forced transparency. Through the clear barriers, I could see her frantically pulling documents, her normally perfect hair showing signs of stressed readjustment. But I didn't approach her office. I went to the client call, room and dialed Tokyo. Nakamura-san, I began in the formal Japanese I'd been practicing for over a year. I received your email regarding yesterday's contract signing. I wanted to personally assure you that I remain committed to overseeing your implementation as originally discussed. There was a pause, then Nakamura's voice, warm with recognition. Alexandria-san, I was concerned when you were not present yesterday. The woman who signed, she was not familiar to me or my team. We specifically requested your involvement in the contract execution as you've been our trusted partner throughout this process. The validation washed over me like a wave, but I maintained professional composure. There was an internal misunderstanding regarding account leadership. Our executive team is addressing it now to ensure clear communication moving forward. I see, he replied, and I could hear the subtle note of disapproval. In Japanese business culture, such misunderstandings reflected poorly on organizational integrity. We value consistency and trust in our partnerships. My team expressed immediate concern when your name was absent from the final documentation. I appreciate your trust, Nakamura-san. I've just come from a meeting with our senior vice president, and I can assure you that I will personally oversee the implementation phase as originally planned. After we disconnected, I sat for a moment in the quiet room, absorbing what had just happened. The client hadn't just noticed my absence, they had formally questioned it. In an $18 million international partnership, such questions weren't minor footnotes, they were existential concerns. My phone buzzed with a message from Claire in Finance. HR just pulled all expense reports for Nakamura account past 18 months. Sophia is in with Richard and legal now. You might want to prepare for a call. I didn't respond immediately. I needed to process this acceleration of events. So I walked to the office kitchen and made a cup of tea I didn't particularly want, just to have something ordinary to do with my hands while extraordinary things unfolded around me. The kitchen wasn't empty. Liam from product development was there, pretending to be fascinated by the coffee machine settings. As I reached for a mug, he leaned in slightly and murmured, "Whatever you did, it's working. It just got a request to pull all email communications regarding Nakamura from the server archive. That only happens when someone important is in trouble." I maintained a neutral expression. I didn't do anything except document my work. Liam raised an eyebrow. "Well, your documentation just caused an emergency executive committee call. Good luck." He raised his coffee in a subtle toast and departed, leaving me alone with the humming refrigerator and my thoughts. By 4:45 p.m., the call came. Not from Richard or HR, but from Sophia herself. Her name flashing on my screen felt like a warning light. I answered with professional detachment. "Alexandria." Her voice was strained, lacking its usual polished confidence. "We need to talk. Privately. Can you come to Conference Room E?" Conference Room E was the smallest meeting space, tucked away in a corner with no glass walls or visibility from the main floor. The request itself was telling. She wanted no witnesses. "I think any discussion should include HR at this point, Sophia. I'm happy to meet in Richard's office instead." The silence that followed contained multitudes: shock, calculation, desperate recalibration. "This isn't what you think," she finally said. "There's context you're missing." I believe my documentation provides quite comprehensive context. If there's additional information relevant to who managed the Nakamura relationship, I'm sure Richard and legal would be interested to hear it as well. Another pause. "You've been planning this, haven't you? Waiting for the perfect moment to undermine me." The accusation was so perfectly inverted that I almost laughed. "Sophia, I've been doing my job and maintaining meticulous records because that's what international partnerships of this magnitude require. The only planning I did was for the client's needs." "You could have just talked to me directly instead of going nuclear with this," she hissed, abandoning all pretense of collegiality. "The way you talked to me directly before presenting my work as your own to the executive committee? Or before signing a contract where the client specifically requested my involvement?" My voice remained calm, but the edge was unmistakable. "I think we're past the point of private conversations." The call ended abruptly. I set my phone down and took a deep breath. There's a particular kind of satisfaction in standing your ground, when you know every inch of that ground is legitimately yours. It's not triumph or vindication. Those would come later. It's the quiet confidence of knowing you've done everything right, even when others tried to make you invisible. At 5:17 p.m., my phone lit up with a calendar invitation. Subject: Nakamura. Partnership review. Location: Executive Conference Room. Time: 8:30 a.m. tomorrow. Attendees: Richard, legal, HR, Sophia, me, and surprisingly, Marcus Chen from Global Partnerships. I stared at it for a long moment, then accepted with a single tap. That night, I didn't work late. I didn't frantically prepare additional documentation or rehearse impassioned speeches. I went home, opened a bottle of the Sancerre I'd been saving for a special occasion, and sat on my balcony watching the city lights flicker to life as the sun set. This wasn't just about one deal or one promotion. This was about refusing to be erased from my own achievements, about demanding recognition not through complaints, but through irrefutable evidence. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Heard what happened with Nakamura. About time someone called her out. There are others with similar stories. I didn't respond, but I saved the message. This suggested a pattern, not an isolated incident. I wondered how many other achievements Sophia had claimed, how many other careers she had stalled while accelerating her own. I arrived at the office, early the next morning, dressed in a navy suit that projected both authority and professionalism. Hair pulled back in a sleek chignon, minimal jewelry, leather portfolio containing only the essential documents. This wasn't a day for distractions or excessive accessories. This was a day for clarity. The executive conference room was already half full when I arrived. Richard sat at the head of the table, legal counsel to his right, HR director to his left. Marcus Chen nodded in acknowledgment as I took a seat opposite him. The energy in the room was taut, that particular corporate tension that precedes significant restructuring decisions. Sophia was the last to arrive, 5 minutes late, an uncharacteristic tardiness that spoke volumes. She'd opted for a gray suit, subdued compared to her usual bold colors, her expression carefully composed into professional neutrality. She took the only remaining seat, directly across from Richard, and as far from me as the table geometry allowed. Richard didn't waste time with pleasantries. We're here to address a serious discrepancy regarding the Nakamura partnership. Yesterday, we received formal communication from Nakamura Enterprises expressing concern about account leadership representation. He looked directly at Sophia. Would you like to explain why the client believed Alexandria would be signing the contract and overseeing implementation when you presented yourself as the account lead? Sophia straightened, adopting the confident posture that had served her well in countless presentations. There seems to be some confusion about roles and responsibilities. As Director of Strategic Accounts, I naturally provide oversight for all major partnerships. Alexandria has been an excellent team member handling day-to-day communications, but strategic direction and final negotiations fall under my purview. The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees as Richard silently opened a folder and removed a single document. He placed it in the center of the table, rotating it so everyone could see. It was page 7 of the contract requirements, with a highlighted section that read, Nakamura Enterprises requests that Alexandria Chen serve as primary account representative and signatory, maintaining continuity of the relationship established during negotiation phases. This doesn't appear to be about day-to-day communications, Richard said, his tone neutral, but with unmistakable undertones of disappointment. This appears to be a specific client request that was disregarded. Sophia's composure flickered momentarily before she regained control. That clause was an early draft requirement. During final revisions, we determined that director-level oversight would better serve the partnership's scope. Marcus Chen leaned forward. That's interesting, because I spoke with Takahashi-san at Nakamura yesterday, and he specifically mentioned their surprise at Alexandria's absence during the signing. They were under the impression she was leading the account through implementation. Sophia's eyes darted between faces, searching for an ally and finding none. There may have been a communication gap in the transition planning. These large partnerships often involve multiple stakeholders with different understandings of. We have the email trails, Richard interrupted, his patience visibly thinning. All of them, including the ones where Nakamura's team requested Alexandria by name, and the internal ones where you acknowledge those requests without raising any concerns about account leadership. The HR director, a woman named Priya with 20 years of corporate diplomacy experience, spoke for the first time. Sophia, We've also reviewed the performance evaluations you've submitted for Alexandria over the past 2 years. There's a concerning pattern where projects she substantially developed are categorized as team achievements, with minimal recognition of her individual contributions. Can you help us understand this evaluation approach? And there it was. The moment when Sophia realized this wasn't just about one contract or one misrepresentation. This was about a systematic pattern of appropriation that had finally been exposed under the unforgiving light of executive scrutiny. I remained silent, watching as the carefully constructed narrative she'd built began to unravel thread by thread. This wasn't my battle to fight anymore. The evidence was speaking with far more authority than I ever could. Sophia attempted one last redirection. I think we're losing sight of what matters here. The deal is signed. Nakamura is now our client. Isn't the outcome what counts in the end? Richard's response was measured, but resolute. At Everest Financial, how we achieve results matters as much as the results themselves. Our culture is built on integrity and appropriate recognition of contribution. He closed the folder with a finality that felt like a gavel strike. Sophia, please wait outside while we discuss next steps with Alexandria. The look she gave me as she gathered her belongings contained multitudes: anger, disbelief, and something. That might have been respect if it wasn't so thoroughly overshadowed by resentment. The door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow felt louder than a slam would have. When she was gone, Richard turned to me. Alexandria, I owe you an apology. Your work should have been recognized appropriately, and our oversight processes clearly failed in this instance. Before we discuss remediation, I need to ask, do you want to continue managing the Nakamura relationship? The question hung in the air, weighted with implications about trust, career trajectory, and professional vindication. My answer would define not just my relationship with this client, but my future at Everest Financial. I met his gaze directly. Yes. I've invested 18 months in understanding their business needs and building trust with their team. I believe continuity would be in everyone's best interest, especially Nakamura's. Richard nodded, the ghost of a smile acknowledging the diplomatic professionalism of my response. Then, effective immediately, you'll be formally designated as the account director for Nakamura Enterprises, reporting directly to Marcus rather than through Sophia's chain. Marcus leaned forward. We'll need to schedule a proper introduction. With their executive team, a reset of sorts to clarify leadership and ensure they know their partnership is valued. And the commission structure? I asked, addressing the financial elephant in the room. Priya from HR responded without hesitation. Will be adjusted to reflect your role as primary relationship manager. The standard director-level commission will apply retroactively to the signing date. I nodded, absorbing the implications. This wasn't just recognition. It was a de facto promotion with all the accompanying compensation adjustments. And Sophia? The brief exchange of glances around the table told me everything. Richard's response merely confirmed it. That's being addressed separately. Your focus should be on ensuring a seamless experience for Nakamura moving forward. We spent the next 40 minutes discussing transition details, implementation timelines, and communication strategy. Not once did anyone question my capability or authority to lead the account. The transformation was as sudden as it was complete, from sidelined to centered, from overlooked to essential. When the meeting concluded, Marcus stayed behind as the others filed out. You handled this with remarkable grace, he said when we were alone. Many would have burned bridges in your position. I closed my portfolio, considering his observation. Bridges are too valuable to burn, especially in a company this size. But I won't allow myself to be walked over like a doormat either. He nodded slowly. A lesson Sophia is learning the hard way right now. Richard doesn't tolerate misrepresentation, especially when it affects client relationships. He hesitated, then added, For what it's worth, there are at least 3 other accounts where similar questions are now being raised. This confirmed my suspicion that the Nakamura situation wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a pattern. I felt a momentary pang of sympathy for those whose work had been similarly appropriated, whose achievements had vanished into Sophia's growing reputation. "Will there be a formal announcement?" I asked, referring to my new role. "This afternoon. Richard wants to make it unambiguously clear who's leading the Nakamura partnership going forward." Marcus stood, extending his hand. "Congratulations, Director Chen. It's been a long time coming." As I walked back to my desk, the office atmosphere had subtly shifted. Colleagues who normally passed with casual nods now made direct eye contact, their expressions ranging from curiosity to newfound respect. Word travels at quantum speeds in corporate environments, especially news involving executive-level corrections. Liam from product development caught up with me near the elevator bank. "Heard you're calling Nakamura this afternoon as their new account director. Need any product roadmap support for the call?" The casual mention of my new title confirmed the rumor mill was already churning at full capacity. "I might. Let's sync. Up after lunch to review the implementation timeline." He nodded, then lowered his voice. "Sophia's office is being packed up. It is there now, securing her devices." I maintained neutral professionalism despite the significance of this information. "Thanks for the update. I'll be focused on client transition planning if anyone needs me." As the elevator doors closed, leaving me momentarily alone, I allowed myself 5 seconds of pure, undiluted satisfaction. Not gloating, not triumph, just the quiet acknowledgement that sometimes justice arrives dressed in corporate protocol and documented evidence. By lunchtime, Sophia's nameplate had been removed from her office door. By 2 p.m., the company-wide email had gone out announcing my appointment as account director for Nakamura Enterprises, effective immediately. By 3 p.m., I was on a video call with Nakamura himself, Marcus joining to formally introduce me in my new capacity, a capacity the client had recognized long before the company made it official. "We are pleased to see appropriate recognition of Alexandria-san's contributions," Nakamura said with characteristic diplomacy that nonetheless carried unmistakable subtext. "Continuity of relationship is highly valued in our business culture." "Everest Financial shares that value," Marcus replied smoothly. "We're committed to honoring the partnership as originally envisioned and developed by Alexandria." After the call ended, I sat in my office, not Sophia's former space, but my own desk, with a new confidence that transformed the familiar surroundings. My phone buzzed with a notification from HR requesting a meeting to discuss office relocation options. The corporate machinery was now moving swiftly to formalize what the evidence had made inevitable. That afternoon, I received no fewer than 12 congratulatory messages from colleagues, some genuine, some transparently opportunistic. Power shifts create their own gravity, drawing people into new orbits of influence. I responded to each with measured appreciation, neither embracing nor rejecting the newfound attention. The most meaningful message came from Richard himself, a brief email that read simply, "Well earned. Let's discuss your development plan next week. There's a VP track I'd like you to consider." I stared at those words for a full minute, absorbing their implications. This wasn't just about reclaiming one achievement or correcting one injustice. This was about breaking through an artificial ceiling that had been deliberately placed above me, and glimpsing the open sky beyond. As I packed up to leave that evening, I passed the now empty office that had been Sophia's until this morning. Through the glass, I could see bare shelves and clean surfaces, as if she had never occupied the space at all. Corporate erasure happens, with stunning efficiency when necessary. My phone buzzed one final time as I reached the parking garage. A text message from a colleague at a competitor firm. "Heard what happened. Sophia just interviewed here claiming she led the Nakamura acquisition. Should I tell our VP the truth or let her dig her own grave? I considered my response carefully, then typed, "The truth has a way of revealing itself without our help. But if you value your firm's reputation with Nakamura, you might want to suggest they verify account leadership before making any decisions." Driving home, I reflected on how quickly everything had changed. 24 hours ago, I had been silently watching someone else claim credit for my defining achievement. Now, I was stepping into a leadership role that recognized my contributions and positioned me for advancement I'd previously only imagined. This wasn't just about winning one battle against one person who had wronged me. It was about establishing a fundamental principle. Your work belongs to you, your achievements are yours to claim, and documentation is the most powerful ally you can cultivate in a world where others might try to rewrite your story. I didn't feel the need to celebrate extravagantly that night. Instead, I called my mother, a woman who had taught me through example that dignity and evidence speak louder than complaints or accusations. "They finally saw your value," she said simply when I shared the news. "They saw the evidence," I corrected. I made sure it was impossible to ignore. She laughed softly. "That's my daughter, always keeping receipts." As I ended the call, I opened my laptop one last time to send a brief, professional email to Nakamura, confirming our implementation, kickoff schedule, and expressing my appreciation for his partnership. No gloating, no references to previous confusion, just forward momentum and clear leadership. Because in the end, this wasn't about Sophia or what she had tried to take from me. It was about the work itself, the relationships built, the trust established, the value created. Those were the true achievements, and they carried their own validation that no corporate title or corner office could ever match. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new expectations, and the weight of director-level responsibilities. But tonight, I allowed myself to simply acknowledge a fundamental truth. I had earned this moment not by tearing someone else down, but by standing firmly in the value of my own contributions and refusing to be rendered invisible. The $18 million deal wasn't just a corporate milestone anymore. It was a turning point, the moment I reclaimed not just credit for past achievements, but ownership of my professional future. And no signature but my own would ever define that journey again. The office whispers began at 8:17 a.m. Not the usual mundane gossip about weekend plans or coffee machine politics, but the electric murmurs that follow corporate executions. Sophia's dramatic exit had left a vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum almost as much as executives abhor accountability. I arrived carrying a leather portfolio containing the Nakamura implementation timeline, not as armor, but as a reminder of why I was still standing while Sophia was clearing her LinkedIn profile of embellishments. 3 colleagues stopped mid-conversation. As I passed, their expressions a mixture of newfound respect and that particular calculation that happens when power dynamics shift. Emily from marketing approached first, coffee in hand, ambition practically radiating from her pressed blouse. "Alexandria, congratulations on the promotion. Such a well-deserved recognition." Her smile was genuine, but her eyes were hunting for details. "If you need any marketing support for the Nakamura rollout, I'd love to discuss strategy options." I thanked her with professional warmth, promising to schedule time once the initial implementation phase was mapped. This would be the first of 17 similar conversations before I reached my new office, the corner space previously occupied by Marcus Chen, who had moved upstairs to the executive floor following his own promotion announcement this morning. The office reallocation wasn't subtle. Glass walls and maple furniture positioned at the intersection of 2 main corridors, high visibility, high traffic. A statement in corporate architecture about who was ascending and who was to be observed. The nameplate was already updated. Alexandria Chen, Director of Strategic Partnerships. Inside, a handwritten note from Richard sat on the pristine desk. "Make this space your own." Meeting at 11 to discuss Nakamura communication strategy. I hadn't asked for the office, hadn't mentioned physical relocation at all during yesterday's discussions. This was Richard's way of cementing the new reality, making my position change visibly undeniable to everyone who walked these halls. No whispered questions about whether this was temporary or provisional. No ambiguity for those who might still harbor loyalty to Sophia. I was arranging my materials when Marcus appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with casual authority that suggested he'd grown comfortable with his own recent ascent. "Getting settled?" he asked, eyes taking in the space with approval. "I left the whiteboard for you. Best investment I made in this office. Sometimes you need to map things out where you can see them." "Thanks," I replied, genuinely appreciative of both the practical gesture and the implicit acknowledgement that this wasn't charity or consolation. This was earned territory. "Congratulations on your promotion. VP of Global Partnership Suits. You." He smiled, but there was something measured in his expression. "Richard wants to fast-track several initiatives now that we've addressed the leadership misalignment. He mentioned you might be taking on additional accounts beyond Nakamura." This was news. Welcome, but unexpected. "Which accounts?" "That's what we're discussing at 11. But between us..." He lowered his voice slightly. "3 other major partnerships Sophia claimed to have developed are being reviewed. Client feedback suggests their experience doesn't align with her reporting. A pattern, not an isolated incident. The realization settled like a weight and a vindication simultaneously. I wasn't the only one who had been rendered invisible. How many others were affected?" I asked, the question encompassing more than just client accounts. Marcus understood the deeper inquiry. "At least 4 team members whose work was systematically misattributed. 2 have already left for competitors. Richard's having HR review performance evaluations and compensation decisions going back 18 months. The scope was larger than I'd anticipated. Not just one stolen deal, but an entire architecture of appropriation. A chill ran through me as I realized how close I'd come to becoming another statistic. Another talented professional quietly exiting after being erased from their own achievements. "Is there anything I should prepare for the 11 o'clock?" I asked, refocusing on the immediate priorities. "Just bring your full client knowledge. And Alexandria." He hesitated, then continued with careful emphasis. "Richard values directness. If you see problems with how accounts were managed, don't soften the assessment." I nodded, understanding the subtext. This wasn't just about transition planning. It was about damage assessment. "I'll be transparent." After Marcus left, I sat, in momentary stillness, absorbing the rapid evolution of circumstances. 24 hours ago, I had been compiling evidence in a desperate attempt to reclaim a single achievement. Now I was being positioned to evaluate the full scope of Sophia's professional fabrications. My phone buzzed with a notification from our company news channel. Leadership announcement. Alexandria Chen appointed Director of Strategic Partnerships, effective immediately. The formalization of yesterday's email, now pushed to every employee's device. I had approximately 3 minutes before the congratulatory messages would begin flooding in. I used those minutes to center myself. This wasn't just a personal victory. It was a systemic correction that would affect multiple careers and client relationships. The responsibility extended far beyond my own vindication. The 11 o'clock meeting wasn't held in a standard conference room, but in Richard's executive suite, a space reserved for sensitive discussions and high-stakes decisions. Present were Richard, Marcus, Priya from HR, Thomas from legal, and surprisingly, our CFO Diane Miller. Her presence indicated financial implications beyond standard. Personnel matters. Richard didn't waste time with preliminaries. "We've identified significant discrepancies in account management attribution and client relationship reporting. Alexandria, you've experienced this firsthand with Nakamura. We need to understand the full scope before communicating with affected clients." Thomas from legal slid folders across the table to each of us. We've compiled documentation for 4 major partnership accounts previously credited to Sophia. Each shows similar patterns of misattribution and client confusion about leadership. I opened the first folder, a European financial services firm with a $12 million integration contract. Scanning the communication history, I immediately recognized parallels to my experience. Detailed work performed by a manager named Jason Phillips, relationship development spanning 14 months. Then Sophia appearing prominently in final negotiations and claiming primary credit. The second folder contained a domestic healthcare technology partnership. The third, a Canadian manufacturing conglomerate. The fourth, an Australian resource management firm. Each told variations of the same story, meticulous work by team members, rendered nearly invisible in final reporting, with Sophia positioned as the architectural genius behind each success. All told, these accounts represent $43 million in annual contract value, Diane noted, her financial precision cutting through the room. And all have shown recent signs of relationship strain that weren't being accurately reported upward. Richard turned to me directly. Alexandria, you're now our most senior leader who worked closely with Sophia while maintaining direct client relationships. We need your assessment. How extensive is the damage, and what's required to stabilize these partnerships? The question carried enormous weight. My answer would shape not just remediation strategy, but potentially determine the professional futures of everyone who had been affected by Sophia's systematic appropriation. I took a measured breath before responding. Based on what I'm seeing, we have 2 distinct issues. First, client relationships where expectations were set with one relationship manager, but delivery was promised through another. Second, internal attribution failures that have likely affected team morale and retention. I opened the healthcare technology folder. For example, this partnership shows all substantive work was performed by Ryan Martinez, who left the company 3 months ago. The client likely built trust with Ryan, not with Sophia. If they've been dealing with relationship whiplash, that explains the recent communication gaps noted here. Marcus nodded in confirmation. Ryan's now at Meridian Capital, took 2 other team members with him. The relationship stabilization needs to be client-specific, I continued. For accounts where the original relationship manager is still here, like my situation with Nakamura, the solution is straightforward. Restore the expected point of contact. For others where the original person has left, we need to be transparent with clients about leadership changes and demonstrate value continuity. Priya made notes as I spoke. What about the internal attribution issues? This was the more delicate question, addressing not just business impact, but ethical failures within our leadership structure. I chose my words carefully, but without equivocation. There appears to be a systematic pattern of work appropriation that likely affected performance evaluations, promotion decisions, and compensation across multiple teams. Beyond the 4 people whose work is in these folders, I'd recommend reviewing any project where significant credit was claimed by Sophia to identify other potential misattributions. The room fell silent as the implications settled. This wasn't just about one bad actor or isolated incidents. This was about a fundamental failure of oversight that had allowed talent to be exploited and potentially driven valuable team members to competitors. Richard finally broke the silence. Alexandria is right. This requires both client remediation and internal correction. He turned to Diane. I want compensation reviews for everyone who reported to Sophia in the past 2 years. Identify any whose performance evaluations showed inconsistencies with their actual contributions. To Priya, prepare retention packages for any high performers we identify as having been disadvantaged, and reach out to those who left, see if there's any interest in returning under new leadership. To Marcus and me, develop client-specific transition plans for each major account. Alexandria, You'll take direct oversight of Nakamura and the European Financial Services Partnership. Marcus, your team will handle the others with Alexandria's guidance on approach. To Thomas, prepare appropriate documentation for the board. They need to understand both the situation and our remediation strategy. The directives came with the decisive clarity of a leader addressing a systemic failure that threatened organizational integrity. This wasn't damage control, it was structural renovation. As the meeting concluded, Richard asked me to remain behind. When the others had departed, he closed the door and took a seat not behind his desk, but in one of the conversation chairs. A subtle shift that changed the dynamic from hierarchical to collaborative. You handled that exceptionally well, he began. Many in your position would have been tempted toward vindictiveness or self-promotion. I maintained professional composure while acknowledging the compliment. This isn't just about my experience. It's about organizational integrity and client trust. He nodded slowly. Precisely why I want to accelerate your development track. We're implementing a complete review of our attribution and recognition processes across all departments. I'd like you to co-lead that initiative with Priya. The request represented far more than additional responsibility. It was an opportunity to address structural issues that enabled situations like mine to occur in the first place. I'd be honored to contribute to that work, I replied, though I should note that I'm still establishing myself in the director role. Richard's expression remained thoughtful. Alexandria, you've been performing at director level for at least a year while carrying a senior manager title and compensation. The formal promotion is just organizational recognition catching up to reality. He paused, then continued with careful emphasis. We failed you by not seeing this sooner. I failed you. That's something I intend to correct systematically, not just individually. The acknowledgment was unexpected. Senior executives rarely admit oversight failures so directly. It transformed what could have been merely a professional advancement into something more meaningful, a commitment to structural change. Then I accept, I said simply, both the opportunity and the responsibility it represents. As I left Richard's office, the weight of the morning's revelations accompanied me back to my new space. This wasn't just about reclaiming the Nakamura deal anymore. It was about addressing a pattern that had potentially affected dozens of careers and major client relationships. I had just settled at my desk when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Is it true? Did they finally catch her? This is Ryan Martinez. Ryan, the manager credited with the healthcare technology partnership who had left for a competitor. His departure had been explained as pursuing other opportunities, but the documentation suggested a different narrative. I considered my response carefully, aware of both legal implications and ethical responsibility. Significant leadership. Changes have occurred. If you're open to a conversation, I'd welcome connecting about your experience. His reply came immediately. Call me, please. Followed by a phone number. After consulting briefly with Thomas in legal, who advised professional disclosure boundaries while acknowledging the importance of gathering accurate information, I made the call from a private conference room. Alexandria? Ryan's voice carried the particular tension of someone who has long awaited vindication, but doesn't quite trust its arrival. Is it really over? Is she gone? Sophia is no longer with the company, I confirmed, maintaining professional composure. There's an ongoing review of account attribution and client relationship management. His exhale was audible. You don't know how long I've waited to hear that. The healthcare partnership, that was 18 months of my life. Nights, weekends, building trust with their CTO who had been burned by 3 previous vendors. Then suddenly, I'm told I'm too technical to lead the final negotiations, and Sophia steps in presenting my integration roadmap as if she'd architected it herself. The parallels to my experience were striking, not just the appropriation, but the specific technique of sidelining the original relationship builder at the critical moment of recognition. Ryan, the company is reassessing several major accounts and looking to restore appropriate attribution. Your work on the healthcare partnership has been identified as significantly misattributed. There was a pause before he responded. Too little. Too late for me. I'm established at Meridian now. But another hesitation. There are others, still there, who went through the same thing. Jessica in financial services integration, Miguel in product customization. They both had major client wins appropriated. I noted the names, promising to ensure they were included in the review process. Ryan, if you're willing, legal would value a more detailed account of your experience. It would be treated confidentially and used only for internal correction purposes. What followed was 28 minutes of meticulous recounting, dates, meetings, specific presentations, and eventually, the careful exclusion from client communication that preceded Sophia's complete appropriation of credit. The pattern was identical to what I had experienced, executed with such systematic precision that it could only be deliberate strategy, not circumstantial opportunism. After the call ended, I forwarded my notes to legal and HR, then sat in momentary stillness, absorbing the broader implications. This wasn't just about individual career impacts or even client relationships. This was about how organizations create environments where talent can be exploited and achievements stolen through hierarchical advantage. My phone buzzed with a calendar invitation. Richard had scheduled a company-wide town hall for tomorrow morning. Subject: Organizational alignment and partnership updates. The corporate euphemism for significant leadership changes and their implications. As I walked back to my office, I passed Jessica from Financial Services Integration, one of the names Ryan had mentioned. Our eyes met briefly, and something unspoken passed between us. A recognition, perhaps, that tectonic shifts were occurring beneath the polished floors of corporate hierarchy. Alexandria, she said, stopping me with uncharacteristic directness. Is it true? The partnership attribution review? I nodded, maintaining appropriate discretion while acknowledging the reality. Yes. Richard is leading a comprehensive review of major account attribution and relationship management. Her posture changed subtly, a straightening of the spine, a lifting of the chin. Not triumph or vindication, but the quiet reclamation of professional dignity. Thank you, she said simply, and continued toward her desk with renewed purpose. By mid-afternoon, the office atmosphere had transformed. What had begun as whispers about Sophia's departure had evolved into focused energy around the upcoming town hall and speculation about the attribution review. Teams that had been operating in isolated silos were suddenly finding common experiences, comparing notes on projects where recognition had seemed disproportionate to contribution. Marcus stopped by my office as I was preparing client transition documentation. The narrative is shifting, he observed, closing the door for privacy. People are connecting dots they've been staring at for months. Is that a concern? I asked, aware of the delicate balance between transparency and organizational stability. Not a concern, an opportunity, he clarified. Richard sees this as a chance to reset cultural expectations around attribution and recognition. Your experience is becoming a catalyst for overdue change. The framing struck me as both accurate and slightly uncomfortable. I hadn't set out to become an organizational change agent. I had simply refused to let my work be stolen. What's the communication strategy for the town hall? I asked, refocusing on the immediate priorities. Richard will address the leadership, changes directly, announce the partnership attribution review, and introduce the new client relationship management structure. He'd like you to speak briefly about the Nakamura transition, not the misattribution, just the forward strategy. The request was reasonable, focusing on solutions rather than dwelling on problems. I'll prepare appropriate remarks. After Marcus left, I received an unexpected email from our CFO, Diane. Alexandria, Please see me before end of day regarding compensation adjustment and back pay consideration. The subject line was deliberately vague, but the implications were significant. If the company was considering retroactive compensation for misattributed work, it represented a material acknowledgment of the injustice beyond mere recognition correction. When I arrived at Diane's office at 4:30, she was reviewing financial projections with unnerving intensity. She closed her laptop as I entered, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "Alexandria, I've completed an initial review of the compensation impact resulting from the misattribution of the Nakamura partnership." Her tone was matter-of-fact, treating this as a financial correction rather than an emotional vindication. Based on standard commission structures for deals of this magnitude, there's a significant discrepancy between what you received and what you should have earned. She slid a document across her desk, a compensation adjustment calculation that took my breath away. The figure represented not just the commission differential, but also a retroactive salary adjustment to director-level dating back 6 months to when the Nakamura relationship had reached advanced negotiation stages. "This requires Richard's final approval, but I've already secured preliminary authorization," Diane continued. "The payment would be processed with your next paycheck, pending your acceptance." I maintained professional composure while examining the document. The retroactive adjustment to director compensation, is that standard procedure? Diane's expression remained neutral, but her response carried unmistakable significance. "It's appropriate correction when we determine someone has been performing at a level inconsistent with their title and compensation. The documentation indicates you were functioning as director in all but name for at least 6 months." The acknowledgement wasn't just financial. It was institutional recognition that the system had failed to properly identify and reward my contributions until forced to confront irrefutable evidence. "We're conducting similar reviews for others, potentially affected," Diane added. "Your case is simply the first to be processed given the documented clarity." I signed the acceptance form with measured deliberation, understanding this represented more than monetary compensation. It was the company's material acknowledgement of its oversight failure and commitment to remediation. As I left the finance department, my phone buzzed with a notification from the client management system. Nakamura had requested a video call to discuss implementation timelines, addressing me directly as account director without any mention of previous confusion. The swift normalization of my rightful role felt like the final piece settling into place. That evening, as I prepared my remarks for tomorrow's town hall, I reflected on the rapid transformation of circumstances. In less than 48 hours, I had gone from silently watching my achievement being claimed by another to helping reshape organizational recognition structures. The journey wasn't just about reclaiming what was rightfully mine. It had become about ensuring others wouldn't face the same erasure, about converting individual vindication into structural improvement. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Draft agenda for tomorrow attached. You're slotted for 5 minutes after Richard's opening remarks. Focus on forward strategy, not past issues." I reviewed the agenda, noting the careful sequencing. Richard. Addressing the leadership changes, my Nakamura transition overview. Then Priya introducing the new attribution review process we would co-lead. The narrative was being deliberately constructed to emphasize institutional correction rather than individual failings. As I finalized my presentation points, I received one last message, this one from Richard himself. "Alexandria, tomorrow represents not just a correction of past mistakes, but the establishment of new standards. Your handling of this situation has demonstrated exactly the leadership qualities we need. See you at 9. I set my phone aside and turned back to my notes, recognizing the responsibility inherent in the opportunity. This wasn't just about my signature on the Nakamura contract anymore. It was about ensuring every contribution was properly attributed, every achievement appropriately recognized, and every talent valued for their actual impact rather than their position in the hierarchy. Tomorrow wouldn't just be about what had been taken from me and returned. It would be about what could be built from the ashes of old systems that had enabled talent exploitation and achievement theft. And that transformation, from individual vindication to structural improvement, was perhaps the most meaningful victory of all. The town hall began with unusual punctuality. 9 a.m. sharp, not the standard corporate 7 minutes late that had become an unspoken cultural allowance. The auditorium filled quickly, an electric undercurrent of anticipation replacing the typical morning lethargy. Something transformative was happening, and no one wanted to miss witnessing the reformation of company hierarchy in real time. I arrived early, choosing a seat in the front row not from ego but from practicality. I would be speaking, and the shorter walk to the stage meant fewer steps under scrutinizing gazes. Marcus sat beside me, tablet open to the presentation deck, occasionally glancing toward the entrance as executives filtered in. "Ready?" he asked, voice low enough that only I could hear. I nodded, maintaining outward composure while my mind categorized and prioritized the magnitude of this moment. This wasn't just about me anymore. I had become the inadvertent catalyst for systemic change, the first domino whose fall would potentially restructure how talent was recognized and contributions valued across the entire organization. At precisely 03:02, Richard walked onto the stage without introduction or fanfare. The room fell silent immediately, not the gradual quieting that typically precedes executive addresses, but the immediate stillness that accompanies recognized watershed moments. "Good morning," he began, voice carrying clearly without artificial amplification. "Today we're addressing changes in our leadership structure and introducing new standards for partnership attribution and recognition. No corporate euphemisms, no gentle on-ramping to difficult topics." The directness itself signaled the gravity of the situation. "Effective yesterday, Sophia Westfield is no longer with Everest Financial." He paused, allowing the statement to settle across the room. "This decision follows an extensive review of partnership attribution practices and client relationship management approaches." Murmurs rippled through the audience, not surprised at the news itself, which had already permeated the office grapevine, but at the uncharacteristic transparency with which it was being addressed. "What we discovered," Richard continued, "was a pattern of systematic misattribution that affected multiple major client relationships and team member contributions. This represents a fundamental failure of our oversight processes and recognition systems, a failure I take personal responsibility for as your CEO." The admission of executive accountability sent another wave through the audience. Corporate culture typically insulated leadership from such direct acknowledgment of systemic shortcomings. Moving forward, we are implementing comprehensive changes to ensure appropriate attribution of work, transparent client relationship management, and recognition systems that accurately reflect individual contributions regardless of position in the organizational hierarchy. He gestured toward me. "Alexandria Chen has been appointed Director of Strategic Partnerships, with immediate oversight of the Nakamura Enterprises relationship and other key accounts. She'll share our transition strategy momentarily." As I stood and approached the stage, I felt the weight of hundreds of gazes, some curious, some supportive, some calculating the implications for their own positions in this new landscape of recognition. The walk to the podium felt simultaneously endless and instantaneous. "Thank you, Richard," I began, voice steady despite the momentous context. "The Nakamura partnership represents a significant opportunity for collaborative growth built on mutual trust and transparent communication." I deliberately avoided any reference to previous misattribution or the circumstances of my appointment. This wasn't the forum for personal vindication narratives. It was about establishing forward momentum and structural integrity. Our implementation strategy focuses on 3 core principles: relationship continuity, value acceleration, and innovation integration. I advanced through slides that outlined specific timelines, resource allocations, and success metrics. All information I had developed during the original partnership cultivation that had been subsequently obscured in Sophia's presentation. What distinguishes our approach is the direct alignment between client needs and our delivery capabilities. We've structured the implementation team to mirror Nakamura's organizational priorities, ensuring seamless communication channels and accountability at every stage. The presentation wasn't just about Nakamura. It was a model for how all partnerships would be managed moving forward, with clear attribution, transparent leadership, and recognition flowing to those who created the value rather than those positioned to claim it. As I concluded and returned to my seat, Richard resumed center stage. Alexandria's approach exemplifies the standards we're establishing across all client relationships. To ensure these standards become systemic rather than exceptional, we're implementing a comprehensive attribution review process. He introduced Priya from HR, who outlined the new attribution framework with clinical precision, documentation requirements, contribution verification protocols, and recognition metrics that would govern performance evaluation and compensation. Decisions moving forward. This isn't just about correcting past oversights, Priya emphasized. It's about creating sustainable structures that prevent recurrence and establish Everest as a leader in talent recognition and contribution valuation. The town hall concluded with a brief Q&A session where Richard addressed inquiries with unprecedented directness, acknowledging the review would likely identify additional cases requiring correction, confirming compensation adjustments would be implemented where warranted, and establishing clear timelines for the full organizational assessment. As we exited the auditorium, the atmosphere had shifted from speculative tension to purposeful energy. Teams clustered in hallways and meeting pods, discussing implications and opportunities rather than dwelling on past grievances. The conversation had already moved from what had happened to what would happen next, exactly as Richard had intended. Marcus caught up with me near the elevator bank. "That went precisely as needed," he noted, voice low. "You struck the perfect tone, forward-looking competence rather than retrospective vindication." I nodded acknowledgement while maintaining professional focus. "The real work starts now. We need to begin client transition communications immediately, particularly for the accounts where relationship managers have left the company." "Already in motion," he confirmed. "Richard wants you to join the executive strategy session at 11. They're mapping comprehensive remediation for all affected partnerships." The invitation represented another elevation, from recently recognized director to strategic contributor at the executive level. The pace of repositioning was almost dizzying, a professional ascent compressed into days rather than the typical corporate years. "I'll be there," I confirmed, already mentally cataloging the partnership documentation I would need to review before the session. As Marcus departed toward his office, Jessica from Financial Services Integration approached, her expression a complex mixture of hope and hesitation. "Alexandria, do you have a moment?" she asked, posture reflecting the particular tension of someone about to reveal vulnerability in a professional context. I gestured toward a nearby meeting pod, providing privacy for whatever she needed to discuss. Once seated, Jessica's professional composure momentarily faltered. "The European Financial Services Partnership," she began, voice carefully controlled. "That was my work. 14 months of relationship building, custom integration design, flying to Zurich monthly to build trust with their risk management team. Then suddenly I'm told I'm too technical for final negotiations, and Sophia steps in presenting my security framework as her strategic vision." The pattern was unmistakable, identical to my experience with Nakamura and Ryan's with the healthcare partnership. The specific technique of sidelining the original relationship. Builder as too technical appeared to be Sophia's signature method of appropriation. "Have you documented the contribution timeline?" I asked, already shifting into the attribution review mindset that would govern my work with Priya. Jessica nodded, reaching for her tablet. I've maintained comprehensive records since the initial prospecting call. Every presentation, every email chain, every implementation specification, even though I was removed from client communication 3 weeks before contract signing. The thoroughness of her documentation reflected the particular diligence of someone who sensed their work might be appropriated, the professional equivalent of defensive driving in anticipation of potential collision. This is exactly what the attribution review needs, I confirmed, sending her the secure submission portal Priya had established following the town hall. Submit everything through this channel, and I'll ensure it receives priority review. Jessica's expression shifted, subtly, not quite relief, but the particular unburdening that comes when long-carried evidence finally finds receptive evaluation. "Is it really changing?" she asked, the question encompassing far more than just this specific situation. The system that allowed this to happen for so long? I considered my response carefully, recognizing the responsibility of my newly elevated position while maintaining authentic perspective. "It's changing because people like you maintained records even when there was no clear path to recognition," I replied. "Systems don't transform themselves. They change when enough individuals refuse to accept erasure." As Jessica departed with renewed purpose, my phone buzzed with a notification from the client management system. Nakamura had approved the implementation timeline without revision, a vote of confidence that validated not just the plan, but the restoration of appropriate relationship leadership. I had just returned to my office when my assistant, a position allocation that had materialized with my director appointment, notified me that Ryan Martinez was in the reception area requesting a meeting. The unexpected appearance of the former manager who had left for a competitor after his healthcare partnership was appropriated created potential complications. I consulted briefly with legal before agreeing to a 15-minute conversation in a neutral conference room rather than my office. Ryan's appearance had changed since his company profile photo, the carefully maintained corporate aesthetic replaced by the more individualistic presentation often adopted after escaping constraining environments. His handshake was firm, his eye contact direct. "I didn't expect to be back here so soon," he began once we were seated. "But after our call yesterday and seeing the company-wide email about the attribution review, I felt compelled to contribute directly." He placed a thumb drive on the table between us. "This contains my complete documentation of the healthcare partnership development, 18 months of work that was systematically erased from recognition. I've already provided copies to legal and HR through their secure channels, but I wanted to deliver this personally." The gesture carried symbolic weight beyond the practical utility of the documentation. This was a former employee investing personal time and presence to contribute to organizational correction rather than simply moving forward with his new position. "Why?" I asked directly, seeking the authentic motivation rather than making assumptions. Ryan considered the question with appropriate seriousness. "2 reasons. First, there are still good people here whose work deserves proper recognition. Second, what happened to us shouldn't happen anywhere, and Everest has the market position to establish new industry standards for attribution and recognition." His perspective expanded the implications beyond our specific organization to broader professional ecosystem transformation, a vision that aligned with Richard's larger ambitions for the attribution review process. "The healthcare partnership is slated for priority reassessment," I confirmed. "Your documentation will be instrumental in establishing accurate attribution." Ryan nodded acknowledgment, then asked the question that likely represented his true purpose in coming. "What about Miguel in product customization and Taryn in enterprise integration? Have they been included in the review?" The inquiry revealed his continued concern for colleagues whose work might have been similarly appropriated, but who might lack either the documentation or the professional courage to come forward independently. "All major partnerships are being reviewed," I assured. But I'll personally ensure these specific cases receive appropriate attention. As our meeting concluded, Ryan offered a parting observation that captured the transformative potential of the current moment. What's happening here isn't just about correcting past injustices. It's about establishing that talent doesn't need to choose between recognition and remaining with an organization. That's revolutionary in this industry. The perspective stayed with me as I prepared for the 11 o'clock executive strategy session. This wasn't merely an internal correction exercise. It was potentially a competitive differentiation strategy. In an industry where talent acquisition and retention determined market position, establishing systems that ensured appropriate recognition could fundamentally alter recruiting dynamics and staff loyalty. The executive boardroom was already half full. When I arrived, Richard at the head of the table, Marcus to his right, Diane from finance reviewing documents with focused intensity. The remaining seats filled quickly with division heads and strategic directors, the atmosphere reflecting the particular focus that accompanies material organizational realignment. Richard began without preamble once the door closed. We've identified 23 major client relationships requiring attribution review and potential leadership reassignment. Alexandria, given your direct experience and newly established credibility with Nakamura, we'd like you to oversee the transition framework development. The assignment represented significant expansion beyond my expected role, from managing specific partnerships to architecting the entire remediation approach. It was both professional recognition and substantial responsibility increase. I've already begun mapping partnership categories based on relationship complexity and attribution clarity, I responded, displaying the preliminary framework I'd developed following yesterday's revelations. We can establish 3 transition tracks with differentiated approaches based on client sensitivity and internal attribution status. For the next 90 minutes, we collaborated on comprehensive remediation strategy, identifying affected partnerships, assessing client communication needs, reallocating relationship management responsibilities, and establishing recognition, correction protocols for team members whose contributions had been obscured. What emerged wasn't just a correction plan, but a fundamental reimagining of how client relationships and internal contributions would be documented, evaluated, and recognized. Moving forward, the attribution review had expanded from remediation exercise to organizational transformation catalyst. As the meeting concluded, Richard requested that I remain behind. When the room had cleared, he shifted from the head of the table to sit directly across from me, a positioning that signaled collaborative exchange rather than hierarchical directive. You've handled this transition with exceptional professionalism, he began. Many in your position would have been tempted toward personal vindication rather than organizational improvement. I acknowledged the observation while maintaining appropriate perspective. The opportunity to create systemic change is ultimately more valuable than individual recognition. Richard nodded, his expression reflecting both approval and speculative assessment. That perspective is precisely why I'd like you to consider taking a more formal role in our organizational redesign. The attribution review has revealed structural weaknesses beyond just partnership management. Fundamentally, we've been operating with insufficient safeguards against contribution appropriation at multiple levels. He slid a document across the table, an organizational chart showing a new position reporting directly to him. VP of Talent Recognition and Contribution Systems. This would be a significant expansion beyond your current director role, he continued, overseeing not just client partnerships, but the entire framework through which we evaluate, recognize, and reward individual contributions across all departments. The position represented a transformation of my professional trajectory, from fighting for recognition of a single achievement to potentially reshaping how an entire organization valued and acknowledged its talent at every level. The role would include executive compensation committee participation, direct involvement in promotion decisions, and authority to implement attribution verification systems company-wide, Richard explained. Essentially, you would become the institutional safeguard against exactly what happened to you and others under Sophia's leadership. The opportunity was simultaneously compelling and daunting, a chance to systematically address the structural vulnerabilities that had allowed contribution appropriation to flourish, but also a position that would place me in direct evaluation oversight of executives with significantly longer tenure. I'd need to maintain my direct involvement with Nakamura during the critical implementation phase, I noted, addressing practical considerations while processing the larger implications. Absolutely, Richard agreed. Your client relationships remain yours to manage. This role would be additive rather than replacement, expanding your institutional impact while maintaining your partnership leadership. I studied the organizational chart, noting reporting relationships and strategic positioning. The role would require authority to implement changes that might encounter resistance from established leadership. Richard's expression conveyed understanding of the underlying concern. You would have my explicit backing and board-level support for necessary reforms. The events of the past week have created unprecedented openness to structural change, a window of opportunity that may not remain open indefinitely. The observation captured the unique confluence of circumstances, a moment where organizational power structures were temporarily destabilized, creating possibility for reforms that might otherwise face entrenched resistance. I'd like 24 hours to consider the full implications, I responded, recognizing both the opportunity and the responsibility inherent in the proposed position. Richard nodded appreciation for the measured approach. Take the time you need. This isn't just about organizational needs. It's about aligning your career trajectory with meaningful impact potential. As I left the executive suite, the hallway buzz had shifted from speculation about Sophia's departure to focused engagement with the attribution review process. Teams were compiling documentation, managers were reviewing contribution records, and a new energy of accountability permeated the atmosphere. My phone buzzed with a notification from Nakamura, not a business inquiry, but a personal message from Takahashi-san, their chief integration officer. Alexandria-san, we are pleased to see appropriate recognition of your leadership. Integrity in partnership reflects integrity in organization. The observation captured the external perspective on our internal transformation. Clients weren't just passive recipients of our organizational changes, but actively evaluating what those changes revealed about institutional values and reliability. As I reached my office, Jessica was waiting outside, tablet in hand and two colleagues at her side, Miguel from product customization and Taryn from enterprise integration, the very people Ryan had specifically mentioned during our meeting. We've compiled our complete partnership documentation, Jessica explained, her expression reflecting both professional determination and cautious optimism. All 3 European financial services implementations, the healthcare platform customization, and the Canadian resource management integration. The documentation represented years of collective work that had been systematically appropriated, not just isolated achievements, but entire career-defining projects whose attribution had been distorted through hierarchical advantage. The attribution review team will begin assessment immediately, I assured them, providing secure submission access and confirmation protocols. Your contributions won't remain invisible. After they departed, I closed my office door and sat, in momentary stillness, absorbing the rapidly evolving landscape. In less than a week, I had gone from watching my achievement being claimed by another to being offered institutional authority to remake the entire recognition system. The proposed VP position would place me at the nexus of organizational power, not just participating in executive decisions, but fundamentally reshaping how contribution was evaluated and rewarded across all levels. It represented the opportunity to transform individual vindication into structural reformation that would benefit countless professionals whose work might otherwise be appropriated or obscured. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Heard about Richard's offer. The position's been under consideration for months, but they couldn't identify the right candidate until now. This isn't reactive, it's strategic. You've demonstrated exactly the leadership quality they've been seeking. The context provided valuable perspective. This wasn't merely a response to current circumstances, but alignment with longer-term organizational evolution. The attribution crisis had simply accelerated identification of leadership needs that had been developing beneath the surface. As I reviewed the position description in greater detail, what struck me most wasn't the authority or visibility, but the potential impact on organizational culture. Beyond preventing future misattribution, this role could establish new standards for how talent was valued, contributions recognized, and professional advancement determined, potentially shifting from a system where hierarchical position enabled achievement appropriation to one where actual contribution drove recognition regardless of title or tenure. The transformation wouldn't be simple or immediate. Established power structures rarely yield without resistance, and systemic change requires sustained commitment beyond initial correction momentum. But the unique convergence of circumstances, irrefutable evidence, executive accountability, client validation, and documented pattern recognition had created unprecedented opportunity for fundamental reformation. By day's end, the attribution review had already identified 15 additional partnerships requiring leadership reassessment, and 11 team members whose contributions warranted recognition correction. The scope continued expanding beyond Sophia's direct impact to reveal systemic vulnerabilities throughout the partnership management structure. As I prepared to leave for the evening, Richard sent a final message. The board has unanimously approved the new VP position and endorsed your candidacy. Whatever you decide, know that your handling of this situation has already changed how we operate as an organization. Some leadership qualities only become visible when integrity is challenged. I stood at my office window watching the city transition from day to evening, professional buildings illuminated against the darkening sky. The metaphor wasn't lost on me, light revealing what had previously been obscured, visibility extending beyond immediate surroundings to encompass broader landscapes. The journey that had begun with a stolen signature had expanded into potential organizational transformation, not because I had sought institutional power, but because I had refused to accept erasure from my own achievement. That refusal had revealed not just one leader's misappropriation, but structural vulnerabilities that affected dozens of talented professionals and millions in client relationships. Tomorrow I would accept the VP position, not from ambition, but from recognition that systems only change when someone assumes responsibility for their reformation. The path forward wouldn't be without challenges, but it offered something more valuable than mere professional advancement: the opportunity to ensure that talent would be recognized for actual contribution rather than hierarchical position. That achievement would be attributed to its true source rather than its convenient claimant, and that integrity would become institutional practice rather than individual exception. The client may have asked for my signature, but what they had really demanded was authenticity. The same authenticity now reshaping an entire organization from within. And that transformation from individual vindication to structural improvement represented the most meaningful achievement of all. 6 months transformed everything. My office, now a corner suite on the executive floor with views stretching toward the bay, bore little resemblance to the standardized workspace I'd occupied when Sophia first claimed my Nakamura deal. The nameplate beside my door read, Alexandria Chen, Executive Vice President of Talent Recognition and Strategic Partnerships, a title created specifically to address the systemic failures her deception had exposed. But physical trappings of advancement told only the surface story. The real transformation lived in the structural changes reshaping Everest Financial from its foundation: new attribution protocols governing every client relationship, transparent contribution tracking across all departments, and performance evaluation systems designed to recognize achievement regardless of hierarchical position. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows as I reviewed quarterly performance data on my tablet. The numbers told a compelling narrative beyond mere financial metrics. Voluntary retention had improved 24% among high-performing. Managers' client satisfaction scores had increased across all major partnerships, and recruitment success for senior positions had accelerated significantly. Talent was responding to authentic recognition practices with measurable loyalty and performance improvements. My reflective moment was interrupted by a gentle knock. Marcus, now Chief Operating Officer following his own advancement, entered, with the particular energy that accompanied significant developments. "They accepted," he announced without preamble, taking a seat across from my desk. "Meridian Capital. Full partnership integration with complete talent retention guarantees." The news represented a milestone beyond ordinary business acquisition. Meridian was where Ryan Martinez and several other high performers had fled after having their work appropriated under Sophia's leadership. Their agreement to integrate with Everest signaled industry-wide recognition of our organizational transformation. "All of them?" I asked, the question encompassing more than just legal entities. Marcus nodded, understanding the deeper inquiry. "Ryan will lead the combined healthcare practice. The entire team is returning, with appropriate position adjustments and back pay considerations for original contribution value." The development wasn't just a corporate acquisition. It was the healing of an institutional wound. Talented professionals who had departed under systematic misattribution were choosing to return because our attribution reforms had created an environment where their contributions would be properly recognized and valued. "This validates everything we've built," I observed, mentally cataloging the systemic changes that had made such reconciliation possible, not just the attribution frameworks, but the cultural transformation they've enabled. "Richard wants you to lead the integration announcement at the quarterly town hall tomorrow," Marcus added. "The narrative is powerful. Talents who left because their work was appropriated are returning because the system has been fundamentally reformed." The symmetry was undeniable. The very professionals whose departures had signaled systemic failure were now becoming emblems of successful transformation, not through corporate platitudes, but through their willful return to an organization that had acknowledged its failures and implemented structural remedies. "I'll develop appropriate messaging," I confirmed, already mentally framing an approach that would emphasize institutional learning rather than individual vindication. This represents more than just talent reacquisition. It's validation of attribution as a competitive differentiation strategy. After Marcus departed, I turned to the window, watching sailboats navigate the bay with purposeful precision. The maritime choreography mirrored our organizational navigation over the past 6 months, intentional course corrections creating entirely new destinations that had previously seemed beyond reach. My reflective moment was interrupted by my executive assistant's voice through the intercom. "Alexandria, Nakamura-san is on line 1. He specifically requested to speak with you rather than scheduling through channels." The direct outreach from Nakamura's CEO represented the particular privilege of relationships built on demonstrated integrity rather than hierarchical positioning. I accepted the call immediately. "Alexandria-san?" Nakamura's voice carried the measured formality that characterized Japanese executive communication. "I trust this finds you well. I'm calling regarding a matter of some sensitivity that warrants direct discussion." "I appreciate your call, Nakamura-san," I responded, matching his formal tone while maintaining the authentic relationship we'd developed. "How may I assist you today?" "We have received an unusual communication," he continued. "A representative from Global Financial Partners has approached us claiming to be Sophia Westfield, now operating under their banner. She has suggested that implementation challenges at Everest might warrant reconsideration of our partnership structure." The information landed with surprising impact despite its predictability. Sophia had resurfaced at a competitor, attempting to leverage the client relationships she had previously claimed as her achievements. The approach was both audacious and strategically flawed. Approaching Nakamura directly rather than through appropriate channels reflected fundamental misunderstanding of Japanese business culture. "I appreciate you bringing this to my attention," I replied, maintaining professional composure while acknowledging the sensitivity. "May I ask what response you provided to this outreach?" Nakamura's tone carried subtle indignation beneath his measured delivery. "We informed Ms. Westfield that our partnership with Everest was founded on established trust with specific leadership, particularly your stewardship, and that implementation has proceeded exceptionally well under your guidance. We then notified our legal department of the inappropriate solicitation attempt. The response reflected not just client loyalty, but validation of our attribution-based approach to relationship management." Nakamura recognized the authentic leadership behind their partnership success and rejected attempts to leverage hierarchical positioning without substantive contribution. "Your directness is greatly appreciated," I acknowledged. "While transitions occasionally occur in our industry, our commitment to your implementation success remains absolute. The relationship we've built transcends individual representatives." After appropriate closing courtesies, I ended the call and immediately contacted our legal department. While Sophia's approach likely violated standard non-solicitation provisions, the greater significance lay in its strategic failure. Attempting to claim client relationships where the actual relationship builder remained actively engaged reflected fundamental misreading of partnership dynamics. By midday, reports had surfaced of similar outreach attempts to 3 other major clients, each rebuffed with comparable directness, each reported through appropriate channels, and each reinforcing the value of authentic relationship development over hierarchical positioning. The quarterly executive committee meeting that afternoon began with Richard addressing these developments directly, not as threats, but as validation of our strategic direction. 6 months ago, we discovered a fundamental vulnerability in our partnership attribution systems, he began, surveying the assembled leadership team. Today, that vulnerability has become our competitive advantage. Clients are actively rejecting solicitation attempts because they recognize authentic relationship development and transparent attribution. Diane from Finance provided supporting metrics. Client retention had increased 18% since implementing the attribution reforms. Partner satisfaction scores showed double-digit improvement, and relationship expansion within existing accounts had accelerated significantly. The financial impact extends beyond retention metrics, she noted, displaying revenue projections that showed substantial growth trajectories. Clients are increasing engagement scope, specifically citing relationship authenticity and attribution, transparency as differentiating factors in their decision-making. The discussion shifted to industry-wide implications as competitors began implementing their own versions of attribution reforms, some substantive, others merely cosmetic attempts to appropriate the language without the underlying structural changes. We've established first-mover advantage in the attribution transformation space, Marcus observed. The Meridian integration announcement tomorrow will further cement our position as the industry leader in talent recognition and contribution valuation. As the meeting concluded, Richard requested that I remain behind. When the room had cleared, he shifted to a more conversational positioning, a signal that our discussion would extend beyond operational considerations to strategic vision. The Nakamura approach wasn't surprising, he began, but its comprehensive failure is noteworthy. Every client contacted has not only rejected the outreach, but actively reported it through official channels. That level of relationship strength doesn't develop through hierarchical positioning. It emerges from authentic value creation and transparent attribution. I nodded acknowledgment while maintaining professional perspective. The attribution reforms have fundamentally altered how clients evaluate relationship legitimacy. They're now equipped to distinguish between position-based claims and contribution-based authenticity. Richard's expression reflected strategic satisfaction beyond immediate circumstances. This validates our broader transformation thesis. That attribution transparency creates competitive advantage through both talent retention and client loyalty. The question now becomes how we extend this advantage beyond remediation to proactive differentiation. The inquiry opened broader strategic horizons, moving from fixing broken systems to creating entirely new organizational capabilities that competitors would struggle to replicate. The next evolution focuses on predictive attribution, I suggested, sharing a framework I'd been developing. Moving beyond retrospective recognition to prospective identification of high-impact contributors before traditional metrics would reveal their value. We spent the next hour exploring this expanded vision, not just correcting attribution failures, but fundamentally reimagining how talent value was identified, developed, and recognized within organizational structures. The conversation extended beyond immediate competitive positioning to potential industry transformation through attribution leadership. As evening approached, I returned to my office to prepare for tomorrow's Meridian integration announcement. The town hall would mark a symbolic milestone in our transformation journey, the public return of professionals who had departed due to attribution failures now becoming emblems of successful organizational reformation. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica, now Director of Financial Services Integration, following her own advancement through the attribution review process. Just heard about Ryan and the Meridian team returning. The system is actually changing. Thank you for starting this. The message captured the particular significance beyond business metrics. Lives and careers transformed through structural changes that created space for authentic contribution recognition regardless of hierarchical position. As I crafted my remarks for tomorrow's announcement, I focused on the broader narrative beyond specific personalities or circumstances. This wasn't about individual victories or vindications, but about institutional evolution toward valuing authentic contribution over positional advantage. My concentration was interrupted by a notification from building security, a visitor in the lobby requesting a brief meeting. The name on the request form sent a momentary surge of adrenaline. Sophia Westfield. After consulting briefly with legal regarding appropriate protocols, I agreed to a 15-minute meeting in a neutral conference room rather than my office. The encounter would be recorded with security personnel positioned outside. Standard procedures for meetings with former employees involved in potential litigation contexts. I arrived at the designated conference room with deliberate punctuality, neither rushing to accommodate nor delaying to assert dominance. Professional neutrality would govern this unexpected interaction. Sophia's appearance had changed subtly since her departure. Designer suit replaced by more subdued business attire, confident posture slightly diminished by circumstance. The 6 months since her exit had clearly delivered different trajectories for our respective careers. Alexandria, she began as I took a seat across the table. Thank you for agreeing to meet. I recognize this is unconventional. What can I do for you, Sophia? I replied, maintaining professional detachment while acknowledging the unusual circumstances. She placed a folder on the table between Eastgelm Global Financial Partners branded, containing what appeared to be partnership proposals. I've been authorized to discuss potential collaboration opportunities between our organizations. There are several areas where combined capabilities could create mutual advantage. The approach was as transparent as it was audacious, attempting to leverage dubious collaboration to regain access to client relationships she had previously claimed. The strategy reflected fundamental misunderstanding of both our organizational transformation and the relationship dynamics she had damaged. Sophia, I responded with measured directness. Your outreach attempts to Nakamura and other clients have already been reported through appropriate channels. Any legitimate collaboration proposals should be submitted through formal business development processes, not through personal meetings with former employees. Her expression flickered momentarily before resuming practiced composure. "This isn't about the past, Alexandria. It's about potential future opportunities that could benefit both organizations." The professionals who had departed due to systematic misattribution were voluntarily returning because the organization had fundamentally reformed the structures that had previously enabled their erasure. As I walked toward my car beneath the city's illuminated skyline, I received one final message from Nakamura himself, not through official channels, but directly to my personal phone. "Alexandria-san, we have approved the implementation expansion proposal. Your authentic leadership has created trust that transcends typical partnership boundaries. We look forward to continued growth together." The validation extended beyond business metrics to fundamental relationship principles, clients recognizing and valuing authentic contribution over hierarchical positioning. The simple request for my signature 6 months ago had revealed not just one leader's misappropriation, but systemic vulnerabilities affecting countless talented professionals and millions in client relationships. The transformation journey wasn't complete. Organizational evolution never truly reaches destination, only progressive stages of development. But the foundation had been irrevocably altered from position-based authority to contribution-based recognition, creating space for talent to thrive based on actual impact rather than hierarchical advantage. Tomorrow's announcement would formalize this evolution for external audiences, but the true transformation lived in the daily experiences of professionals throughout the organization, people whose contributions were now visible, valued, and appropriately attributed regardless of title or tenure. The client had asked for my signature, but what they had really demanded was authenticity. The same authenticity that now permeated our entire organizational structure from individual recognition to strategic positioning. And that transformation from personal vindication to institutional reformation represented the most profound achievement of all, not just reclaiming what had been taken, but creating systems where such appropriation could no longer thrive. Next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.